For more, let's go to Beirut. Belkis Wille is senior Iraq and Qatar researcher for Human Rights Watch. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thank you for having me.
Your thoughts on these death sentences handed down to French ISIS fighters?
Well, I mean, for the first thing to point out is it's not only French, it is thousands of Iraqi men and boys who have been prosecuted for ISIS affiliation in these fundamentally unfair trials where there are no basic due process rights. They fail by any international standard, where very often people are prosecuted solely based on a confession that they say was extracted by torture. And now we see French and we see other nationals that have been transferred across the border from Syria to be prosecuted in Iraq in these sham trials. And I might add that these are trials that do not allow any participation of victims of horrific ISIS abuse, rapes, killings. They and their families are not allowed to participate.
And grounds for hanging are simply belonging to ISIS. Your thoughts on the grounds under which the death penalty is handed down?
In Iraq, what's applied in these cases is the counterterrorism law. It is incredibly broad and vague. Any act can be imputed as a sign of sympathy or affiliation with a terrorist organization like ISIS, and anything that could be viewed as sympathetic to a group like ISIS could potentially lead to, at minimum, the death penalty, or at maximum the death penalty, or at minimum a life sentence. And in fact, we're seeing the Iraqis not only applying the death penalty, but actually hanging people in cases where the defendants are saying they were tortured and where the sole piece of evidence is that confession that was extracted by torture.
How do you think the French government's been handling it?
While I think it's important to hear that the government takes a position against its nationals facing the death penalty, well, I think it's important to hear that the government now says it's taking steps to ensure that the sentence is commuted. I do have to ask the question, why, if the French authorities really wanted to prevent their nationals from facing the death penalty, why didn't they take their nationals directly from northeast Syria to repatriate them home, investigate them in a robust investigative procedure like you have in France, and prosecute them there? We have people being prosecuted across Europe, including a woman recently prosecuted in Germany for war crimes committed while she was living under ISIS in Syria. So it is possible. If France really wanted to protect its nationals from the death penalty, surely it would have taken swift action to transfer its nationals home for prosecution there.
A few months back, we saw magistrates in Belgium rule that the children of families that had gone to Iraq and Syria to fight with ISIS, they had to be brought home. Do you think that at the end of the day, the courts will settle the matter in places like France?
Unfortunately, as long as these defendants are sitting and rotting away in a prison in Iraq, and as long as their families don't have a way of bringing them back home, I think the reality is we're not going to see much movement. Even in the case of Belgium, with that decision, we still haven't seen the repatriation of the children. And in relation to that decision, the court was actually calling for the repatriation of the mothers as well. That hasn't happened. I think that unfortunately what we're seeing is a fundamental lack of political will across Europe to do anything to bring these nationals home and properly investigate and prosecute them. And to me, the biggest failing in all of this is a failure in upholding the rights of access to justice for the victims of ISIS, because the Iraqi trials do not provide justice to the victims.
Spell that out for us exactly when you say that they don't provide access for the victims.
So the trials in Iraq, in theory, by the letter of the law, should be open to the public, but in reality, they're not. To enter the courthouse in Baghdad where these trials have proceeded, I needed special permission. Iraqis need special permission. And so your average citizen cannot attend the trials. In addition to that, judges are not taking testimony from defendants on specific victims that were at their hands either killed or raped. So no one within the judicial proceedings is trying to identify the victims that came out of these crimes that were committed, and then invite the victims to come into the courtroom to provide their testimony. And many of these victims are alive. I myself have interviewed dozens of Yazidi women, for example, who were held by foreign fighters for years and raped over and over again. They're living in northern Iraq, and they tell me they want justice. They want their day in court, and yet no one from the judicial system has ever contacted them and tried to give them an opportunity to get access to these proceedings.
So what's the calculus for authorities in Baghdad?
Unfortunately, when you talk to judges, when you talk more broadly to the government, they simply say, listen, we have thousands of men and boys we're prosecuting. We don't have time to contact the victims. We don't have time to really get to the heart of the crimes they committed. We'll use this broad brush law, the counterterrorism law, apply this vague label of ISIS affiliation, give them the death penalty, and that's the end of it. And we don't need to do anymore. They are going with efficacy, efficiency, but that really does mean prohibiting space for real justice, for real accountability. And when you talk about the gravity of the crimes that ISIS committed, that is a very serious miscarriage of justice.
Belkis Wille of Human Rights Watch, many thanks for speaking with us from Beirut.